What is going on, FA Nation? Jon Impemba here with Matt Selz, bringing you another edition of FA Sports Talk, weekly show here where obviously we talk about everything going on in the sports world around us. But Matt, I have you here. It's NASCAR weekend, so clearly we're going to be focusing on the return of NASCAR. I think the last time you and I spoke, you mentioned that NASCAR was on a 72, 73-day hiatus. It is now returning with the day, was it Darlington Speedway on Sunday. So tell us about how excited you are to finally have a real NASCAR, not iRacing, back in your life.
I am very excited. If you've listened to the podcast this week that Dan Malin and I put out, it's our longest one yet because we were super excited to get NASCAR back after a 2-month hiatus. It's not much different than the excitement level for the Daytona 500 at this point because that's the first race of the year, and it follows, not having any races from, the previous mid-November all the way until Valentine's, but that's a normal schedule, so you expect that gap. You don't expect a 2-month gap for a global pandemic in the middle of a season. So we're pretty excited to be actually covering Cup races because iRacing, it was fun. I mean, it was entertaining to watch. I know you watched some of the coverage.
Yeah, I thought it was fantastic. I thought the coverage of it was awesome because clearly they weren't taking themselves too seriously, which allowed some of the comedic effects to happen around it. Most of the drivers, at least, were having fun with it. Yeah. Some of them,
there were some issues like
towards it.
Bubba Wallace rage quitting a race.
Yeah, but I loved. Who was it? Was it Hamlin that had his kid unplug the game for him?
Hamlin's eldest daughter walked in and hit the power button. Literally with 3 laps to go, he was about to win, and then all of a sudden he just drops out of the race because his screen shuts off. And then he had a tweet the following week where he was walking around his basement and putting all of the remotes in his basement under lock and key and up on a high shelf his kid couldn't reach. Alex Bowman had his dog drive for him at one point when he was in a pit stop and it caused a crash and he dropped out of the race. There were internet issues, so in terms of actually being able to talk about and strategically plan for a race, this is a whole lot better than virtual racing where guys can lose internet. They're they could be fine 1 second and lose internet. Their dogs can drive. Kids can turn things off. So it's really it's going to be a really fun stretch for NASCAR because they're trying some new things. They're doing midweek races, which they've kind of shied away from in the past. It's going to be hopefully a bunch of new eyeballs on the NASCAR races.
I think it's definitely going to bring new eyeballs. I mean, we're seeing that impact with MMA, UFC with their cards. Whole new audiences are tuning in. It was one of the most bet on UFC cards last Saturday with the 2 championship fights that they had.
Yeah, everything on Twitter was MMA. People that I didn't even know paid attention to MMA were talking about it.
Because they probably didn't until Saturday.
Exactly. So, and I know Steve Phelps, the head of NASCAR, has said that there was 1.5 million unique new viewers of the iRacing coverage on Fox. So hopefully that translates to some new viewership for actual Cup races. So it's going to be pretty exciting here on Sunday afternoon at Darlington, which is also one of my favorite tracks that they run every year.
Yeah, so one of the things that I read and kind of newsworthy is they're not doing any sort of practice laps, they're not doing any qualifying. So for me, I'm wondering, how is this layoff going to impact drivers? I mean, you're talking about not driving in a real car now at these type of competitive levels for 2 months, as you said. Is there any risk of increased crashes? Is there going to be some rust on some drivers, or is it just like riding a bike to these guys at this point? They can get in and go ahead and drive 150, 200 miles an hour, no sweat.
So I think for the most part, the riding a bike analogy pretty well fits. These guys have muscle memory that's trained from years. I mean, a lot of these guys have been in racing since they were, basically kids, 5 or 6. There's some of them that got started later, but the point is they've been doing this for at least, the majority of their life. So they have muscle memory that's built up for, how to react at these kind of speeds. This is a relatively recent race because they raced at Darlington last year in September in the Southern 500. So, in terms of, it's not a racetrack that they only raced once. Like, for example, Atlanta Motor Speedway. They only race that once a year. It's always in the beginning part of the schedule. This year it was actually the first race that didn't get run because of the hiatus, the break that was taken. So, from that perspective, let's say they went back to Atlanta, they'd be having to go over muscle memory back from last March, which is now more than, it's like 14 months ago as opposed to September. So that should help. There's definitely going to be some drivers with rust, that's for sure. Mainly guys like Ryan Newman is probably going to have some rust because he's coming back from an injury that he sustained at the Daytona 500. He's only raced once this year. And he's, been rehabbing. It's not like he got to take a break and just chill and relax. He's been rehabbing. He had a pretty serious either concussion or bruised brain. Either one of those is not a good thing.
Right.
Matt Kenseth is coming back to racing. He hasn't raced a Cup car since November of 2018. So there's definitely going to be rust for those guys. I think competitive juices are going to be going pretty good. The other thing to keep in mind that Clint Bowyer kind of alluded to last week at the final iRacing event is how many of those incidents in iRacing are going to carry over to actual racing. Because some of those guys were taking iRacing more seriously than others.
Yeah. Well, you said Bubba Wallace raged quit because wasn't it Bowyer that crashed into him?
Yeah, Bowyer was bumping him a couple of different times and then finally basically took him out at Bristol and he rage quit and then lost a sponsor because of it.
Right.
I think a lot of these drivers were doing it in jest, but there's certainly some that could take it to the actual track. So that'll be something to watch. So I think the early part of this race is going to be a lot of feeling out the setup, getting used to being in an actual car, getting back used to your visual cues. But in terms of like a wreck fest, I'm not expecting it to be a massive wreck fest. I expect there to be some crashing, but not like a Daytona level wreck fest.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Now, we talked about how they're not doing qualifying for this race. They did sort of a unique thing here, lottery style almost.
Yes.
And you alluded to the fact that they did it based off of like owner points and racing points. They did some sort of combination. Why don't you kind of break it down how they decided where drivers are starting in this race?
So typically in a normal race weekend, you would have a qualifying session generally it's on Friday, even if it's a Saturday or Sunday race. Some races now are going to like morning of, just to spice things up, I guess, or make it harder for fantasy players to figure things out. But in a normal race weekend, let's say they did a qualifying session on Friday, each car goes out for 1 or 2 timed laps. The fastest time counts as your best lap, and then you get put in order of fastest time. So the pole sitter is the guy that ran the fastest lap. The guy that's starting 38th or 40th is the guy that ran the slowest lap. But when qualifying is canceled for whatever reason, let's say there's it gets rained out, or there's some other issue like, let's say, coronavirus, they set the starting lineup. Usually it's based off of owner points, and they just plug and play. So if you're at the tops of owner points, which are different than... When you watch the race, you'll hear them talk about playoff points and drivers in the playoff standings. Drivers get points, and then owners get points. So it's all based on how the car does on the track, where they finish in each race, how many, if you lead laps, various kinds of things. So owner points are calculated a little differently, but they're used to set the starting lineup. So ordinarily, if they would just go owner points, you would have had Kevin Harvick on the pole, Joey Logano would have started second, Chase Elliott would have started third, and I think Matt Kenseth would actually be starting seventh because that's where the 42 car was in points. So instead of doing that, they instead divvied up they grouped the owner points into groups of 12. So the drivers that are 1 through 12 in the owner points were randomly drawn for starting spots 1 through 12 in the race, and 13 through 24 randomly got starting spots 13 through 24. 25 through 36 randomly got those spots, and then there are 4 cars each week that are not automatic qualifiers. They're not what they call charter teams, so they actually have to race their way into the race. Yeah. Those cars got put in order of owner points starting 37th through 40th. So it's a little bit of a twist. I really kind of liked it, especially under these circumstances, because let's face it, it's a little unfair to base something off of what happened 2 months ago.
Right.
And just take it as, well, this would have continued, so let's just take it, because you have no idea what would have happened if they kept racing. If anybody can hear the noise in the background, those are my kids trying to share tablets. It's not going well, apparently. So it was a pretty nifty idea. I liked it. It gave everybody a fair chance. It's not like an NBA lottery where if you were first in owner points, you had the biggest, the most amount of balls in the hopper. It was an equal dispersal. So that was pretty cool, and it certainly gave advantage to some people, and it disadvantaged some others, namely Kevin Harvick, who now is going to start 6th instead of 1st. So for DFS perspective, it actually helped his cause. But then again, it helped Brad Keselowski because now he's on the pole, and the pole wins here pretty often at Darlington.
Oh, I mean, right, and that's actually pretty key, as you mentioned. Having the most laps led, having the great pole position, good for your finish there. Something about the finish in this one, as we mentioned, with sort of their unique way of going about qualifying. You said for this race, they're doing sort of a back end of the race is going to be the pole position for next week's race. Is that correct, or Wednesday's race rather?
So Wednesday there's another race on Wednesday. It's also going to be at Darlington, which is the same track that they're racing on Sunday. So they get 2 races in a row at Darlington, which is pretty sweet. But yeah, ordinarily the finish for one race would have nothing to do with the starting spots for the next race, but we're under different times and we can't run another. They're not going to reshuffle qualifying again. For Wednesday's race, it really doesn't make any sense. There's really not enough time in the schedule to reset all the hoppers, get people to figure out where they're starting, and then, base strategy off that. So what they're doing instead, and they did kind of toy with this a little bit in iRacing with how qualifying worked the last few races, but what they're doing instead is taking the finish positions from Sunday's race and dividing them in half. So there's 40 cars in Sunday's race. If you finish 21st through 40th in Sunday's race, you start there in that exact same spot for Wednesday's race. If you finish between 1st and 20th in Sunday's race, the order gets flipped. So if you win Sunday's race, you're starting 20th in Wednesday's race, and if you finish 20th in Sunday's race, you're on the pole for Wednesday's race. So it will, I think it's going to really make the end of the race very, very interesting for strategy-wise for drivers. And not only that, but it's gonna be an interesting flip for DFS players, because you are trained as a DFS player to try to get as many guys in your lineup that you think can finish as highly as possible. And then, scatter the laps led leaders in there, scatter guys who are going to move up through the field to get to those higher finish spots. But let's say you're in like 12th or 13th and there's like 20 laps to go. You're not going to you're not going to win the race. The only way that a solid finish helps you at that point is if you get a top 5, really helps you in like ownership and driver points. But you're probably not going to make it up 7 spots in 20 laps. So what's the next best thing? Do you stay where you are and try to start the next race 8th, or do you drop back and try to finish Sunday's race like 18th to 20th and start in the top 3 for Wednesday's race? It's also going to mean that racing for the 20th spot is going to be insane from the other direction. Because let's say you're in 23rd. Can you pick up 3 spots?
Probably.
In 20 laps?
If you drive aggressively enough.
Yeah, you could probably pick up 3 spots in 20 laps. So you would go from starting, let's say you finish Sunday's race 23rd. You start Wednesday's race 23rd. But if you finish Sunday's race in 20th, you start Wednesday's race on the pole. That's a huge position advantage.
Right.
Like, huge, because your odds of winning at Darlington historically, if you start inside the top 10, is nearly 85%. And that's over 116 races, which is a huge sample size for NASCAR. So, that means the odds of starting 11th through 40th and winning the race are just over 15% combined for all of those spots. So, yeah, fighting for 20th is going to be something that we're not akin to seeing, but is going to be very important.
And so you obviously have, you have your NASCAR rankings out. You have the podcast that's out there. You did release the Wager Alarm article, but we're looking for the playbook to come out. Why don't you give us a little sneak peek here? You mentioned a little bit of DFS. Who are some of the top guys you're looking for? Maybe give us, a value play that we can target as well.
So some of my top guys, my two favorite plays this week right now are Kevin Harvick and Erik Jones. Both we have... I've talked about Kevin Harvick before on this stream. He's tied for... He leads the field in laps led. He leads the field in average driver rating here, which, for those that don't know, average driver rating is essentially akin to QBR in the NFL. So it's a summation of how you did throughout a race and when you did it. So if you moved up a bunch of spots late, you actually get bonuses for that because it's like crunch time, essentially. Just like if a quarterback leads a couple of TD drives in the fourth quarter, they get more credit for that on QBR than if they did the same in the first quarter. So a higher driver rating indicates, better performance, and Kevin Harvick has the best one in the field this week. He also ties for most top 10s in the last 4 races, with 4 of them. And my second favorite play this week is Erik Jones. He won this race in September. He started 15th. And won the race and led nearly 80 laps in September. So he's a guy that does really well here. He's raced here 3 times at the Cup level, and he's finished inside the top 10 every time. His average finish is actually a tick better than Kevin Harvick's at 4.7 compared to Harvick's 4.8. But I give the nod to Harvick because he's raced 4 times as opposed to Erik Jones's 3, so better sample size for Harvick. Right. But Jones is a pretty decent value on both sites, actually. He's under 10K on both sites, which makes him a really, really nice value, especially starting 20th. I expect him to still finish amongst the top 5, so that's a pretty nice position upside for him. A cheaper guy that I really, really like, I'll give you 2. We'll go with the Dillon brothers. That's right, there's 2 of them. There's Austin Dillon and Ty Dillon. They are related. Austin Dillon is a better play on FanDuel. He's $6,200 on FanDuel compared to the mid-7s on DraftKings, which is just a touch steep for him.
Right.
But the $6,200 on FanDuel is really nice. He's got an average finish of 10.8. He's got some top 10s here. He moves up pretty well throughout the field. And then his brother Ty Dillon, who is less than 6K on both sites. In fact, I think he's 5,000 on FanDuel if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he moves up really, really well here. He's got one of the best position differential marks in the field. He's starting
play probably for value.
Yes, he's starting 31st if I'm not mistaken. So there's really nowhere to go but up for him.
Right.
Even if let's say he finishes, I don't know, 21st, he still picked up 10 position differential points for you, and gotten you a much better finish position and stuff. So he should pay off value pretty easily on both sites, starting down there. And then a contrarian play that I like is actually Matt Kenseth.
Okay.
I know I said earlier in the stream that he hasn't raced in a Cup car.
Coming off 3-year layoff, basically.
About 1.5 years, which, it could be about 3 years. And I mean, he's been at home in Wisconsin with his kids and his family and whatnot. But the reason I like Kenseth as a contrarian play is for a few different reasons. One, this is a track where experience pays off. You have to know how you like the setup on your car because the track is one of the more unique ones on the NASCAR circuit. It's turns 1 and 2 are shaped differently than turns 3 and 4, which means the setup and suspension and ride heights and all that stuff has to be set just to your liking to do really well here. Well, Kenseth has the most experience in the field. He's raced here 25 times. The next closest is Kurt Busch, his teammate, at 23 times. So he knows his way around it. Second reason, the last time they raced at Darlington in May was May of 2013. Matt Kenseth won that race. It was his first race with Joe Gibbs Racing. This is his first race, I believe, with Chip Ganassi Racing. So there's a little bit of a tie-in as well. The 42 car has been really fast all year. Now, yes, Kyle Larson was behind the wheel for the first 4 races until he said something he shouldn't have said on an iRacing stream and got fired from the world of racing, essentially. But the setup for the cars has been dialed in every single week. Like, Kyle Larson hasn't really needed any adjustments.
I was going to say, how much is NASCAR the driver versus the car? Again, as somebody who is not much into the sport, just sort of a novice to following it, is it really the power behind the engine, or is it the guy behind the wheel?
Well, so that's a great question, because it truly does depend. Like, you could put Kyle Busch in basically anything, and he'd still have a shot at winning every single weekend, because he's just that talented. Like, the guy might not have the best personality, but he's clearly the most talented driver in the Cup Series right now. Kyle Larson is a really talented race car driver. However, if you're going to give a talented race car driver, he's the kind of guy that... let's compare this to an NFL running back. Let's say that you have a talented NFL running back, but a guy who can't really find the gaps on his own. If you give him the gaps, he's going to be like a 2,000-yard rusher every year. But if he can't find the gaps, the guy's only going to get like 3 yards a carry, and he's just going to be middling.
It's like the Trent Richardson, where the gap is clearly here, but he's going this way, and therefore he's useless.
Right. So Kyle Larson... he's a guy that can still get the most out of any car you give him, but it really helps his cause if you give him a fast car to begin with, which I guess you could say about most drivers. But the 42 car has been really dialed in all year. I've been listening to when we had the original schedule going the first 4 races, I was listening to the practices, watching them, listening to car radios. Kyle Larson said almost nothing on his car radio, which is usually a really good sign from a driver that the car is dialed in and he's just driving it. So the 42 team has been really good at setting things up. And I brought up Kurt Busch. Well, that's Matt Kenseth's new teammate. And I say new only because it's his new teammate on Chip Ganassi Racing. However, they've been teammates before. So Kurt Busch knows how Kenseth likes to set up his cars. He can get stuff pre-rolling for Kenseth since he got hired like a week ago. And they already know how to work together, which definitely helps cut the rust a little bit faster. So he's a guy that's a contrarian play only, like for GPPs, like huge GPP tournaments. Because, let's face it, the guy has never raced this package in an actual Cup race. Yes, you can simulate it as best you can, but there's going to be rust. People joked that he got the 42 car because that's his age at this point, which I actually think his age is older than the 42 car. I think he's more like 45, if I'm not mistaken. Which you can race when you're that old. It's not necessarily a detriment, but his reaction time might not be quite as quick. So if you're looking for a guy that's probably going to be low owned but has experience at this track, has won here, does have a pretty good history the last few times he's run it, Kenseth is an interesting play.
Right. All right, I think that's pretty cool. So what else are we looking forward to here? Let's kind of wrap this up. So you have the Wager Alarm article out. You are historically great with putting the winner of your Wager Alarm article in the cover. So who are we looking at this week? What's some of your top bets? Who are some of these long shot odds that we should be taking a look at?
Yeah, so when John mentions I've been historically great, last year I think I covered 26 races with the Best Bets piece. I had the cover guy, the guy that was listed as the cover won the race, I think, 15 times, finished second another 5 times. And then there was a few more that I debated between, and had I flipped them, that would have been like 23 of 26 cover guys, either finishing first or second.
You had them listed in the article, or the image guy on the
last year was a pretty good year for me picking winners. This year, there was only 4 races. So, but getting back onto it, I did do pretty well in the iRacing betting though with because all you had to do was bet on William Byron, and he won half of them, so it was a pretty sure bet. The cover guy for this week's best bet is Kevin Harvick, which shouldn't come as a surprise given what I've said about Kevin Harvick through this stream. But yeah, I also like him because he's getting better odds than Kyle Busch is. Kyle Busch is a prohibitive favorite for most books throughout the week, and Kevin Harvick's getting a little bit longer odds.
Mm-hmm.
So for a guy that I like more than Kyle Busch, to get longer odds just goes in my favor because it just means I can make more money if he wins. But yeah, a couple other guys that really piqued my interest that I wrote about in that piece. Kyle Busch is always a favorite wherever he goes. He's capable of winning. He's literally won at every single Cup Series track except for the Roval, but they've only raced that twice, so let's cut him a little bit of a break. So Kyle Busch is still capable of winning. I just like Kevin Harvick better. Sure. Another favorite, we've deemed as favorites because their odds are better than 10-1. Martin Truex Jr. Is going off at like 8-1 on most books.
Yeah.
He's starting 15th, which, if you've listened, previously in the stream, I said, it's a little bit of a long shot to win up from there. However, Erik Jones won in September, starting 15th, and 2 of the last 4 winners at Darlington have started 11th through 15th. So, it's starting to trend a little bit in that direction right now. Truex has won at this track. He's, looked pretty decent in the last few races. He was on the track. But if we want to go for a little bit longer odds that are starting closer to the front, we could look at Matt Dibenedetto, who's going off at like 33 to 35 to 1, depending on the book you're looking at. Yeah. He's starting 3rd. That's a pretty good starting spot for, winning. I think the third, starting 3rd has netted you a win at this track, something like 12% of the time. And then on an even longer shot, we've got Aric Amirola at 66 to 1. He's starting 4th. He's kind of a vanilla guy. He doesn't, he shows up, he races, he gets good finishes, he goes home. There's nothing necessarily, I'm going to say, sexy about Aric Amirola, but, I just mean, in a fantasy, DFS perspective. But he's a solid guy, and he's starting 4th. So anytime you can start in the top 5, you've got basically a 61% chance of winning at this track. So to get 66 to 1 odds on a guy that's still starting in the top 5 is pretty nice.
Nice. I'm looking at some of those things. I like to look at the prop bets that you can maybe see for drivers. You said outright wins. There's a top 3 finish that I'm looking at, and you mentioned some guys who are kind of starting in the front half of that race. That have pretty good odds. You said, Matt Dibenedetto, he has plus 1,000 to finish top 3. Amirola is plus 1,400.
I would take the Amirola bet.
Yeah, so those are pretty decent odds there for guys to just have top 3, not even win.
Right.
And as you mentioned, they're starting ahead, within the top 5 or 6 spots of the race already. So moving up probably wouldn't be too difficult there. So definitely a chance to make some money. There's going to be a lot of eyes on NASCAR this weekend. There's going to be definitely a lot of money on NASCAR this weekend. So
DraftKings has $1 million prize pool going for this weekend's race, not a Millie Maker. They save that for, I think they've run a Millie Maker for Daytona once. But this is $1 million guaranteed prize pool. First place gets $200K. So they're definitely rolling out some big tournaments here for the return of NASCAR, which is nice to see. I did see that there's a Millie Maker for MMA, I think.
Yeah.
They
have the $1 million prize pool as well, and they released an actual Millie Maker where first place $1 million for the return of PGA, which is going to be something.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy considering the fact it's not even a major.
Right.
They're just playing at some course. You don't have to ask Drew Phelps as to what course it is.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's not even like it's the Masters or the U.S. Open or British Open or PGA Championship. It's just some random course that's hosting an event. So, yeah, these companies are pretty well hard up for money right now because they were supposed to be rolling in the dough with MLB DFS at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're transferring all that to the quote-unquote secondary sports. But, we're glad to see it because it'll get more eyes on NASCAR. And for those that are wondering, all of my stuff this week is free preview. for Sunday's race. So you can check out the track breakdown. You can check out the DFS rankings. We have projections out for the first time ever here at Fantasy Alarm. You can check out the playbook will be out Saturday afternoon. The podcast is always free. Take a listen to that. We go over, news of the week. We go over our feelings on a bunch of drivers. This week's, I think, it's like an hour long, but it's a quick hour. You can just, listen to it and do some yard work. So all of that stuff is free this week. Have example lineups coming out on Sunday about an hour before lock time for the race, which will also be free. So if you like what you see, you can sign up. We've got NASCAR packages. You can use my last name, which is right down there below me, and get or John's last name. You can use his too.
Yep.
It gets promo codes.
Yep, 10% off, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, like 10-15% off packages.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can do that, and we got a whole boatload of NASCAR coverage coming out because there's 4 races between Sunday and the following Wednesday.
Right.
And then they just announced 5 more races to carry us through June 21st. So we've got 9 Cup races coming in like the next 5 weeks. So it's gonna be pretty crazy.
Yeah, we look forward to it. Finally getting some actual sports back here. Matt, great breakdown and everything for the race this weekend. Look forward to all of the future content as we hopefully get back to some normalcy, huh?
Yeah, trust me. I want baseball coming back. That's my favorite sport. NASCAR is 1B, baseball is 1A. I want baseball coming back. But I'll take the eyes on NASCAR. Why not? Yeah. I get a chance to defend my FSWA Racing Writer.
Two-time Writer of the Year award.
Yeah, I get a chance to defend that because when there's no races happening, you can't write anything. It's hard to win an award.
Right.
So we'll try our darndest here to go get another one of those.
Awesome. Well, if you're watching this, you have any questions about anything, feel free to hit us up on Twitter. You have our Twitter handles down below. Get us in subscriber chat. We're always in chat, there to answer your questions and, kind of sit out this quarantine with you. But it'll be good to get some sports back. But for myself, Matt Selz, we'll talk to you all next time.